Just how difficult the last 16 months have been for those who've not been able to travel to see their families, and for travel tourism, and for the aviation sector itself, of course. And no minister, let alone the Transport Secretary, would want to ever curtail our freedom and ask people not to travel. But protecting public health has rightly been, and will continue to be, our overriding priority of this government. And that's why we introduced some of the toughest border measures in the world. But we are now, thanks to our brilliant vaccination programme, in a position where we can start to think about how we live with coronavirus, while returning life to a sense of normality. And last week I said at this dispatch box that the government intended to ease restrictions on fully vaccinated travellers returning from amber list countries. Well, now I'm pleased to be able to provide more detail as one of the world's most vaccinated countries. We must use these advantages to restore many of the freedoms that have been necessarily lost over recent months. So I can confirm today that from the 19th of July, UK residents who are fully vaccinated through the UK vaccine rollout will no longer have to self-isolate when they return to England. They'll still be required to take a test 3 days before returning, the pre-departure test, demonstrating they're negative before they travel, and a PCR test on or before day 2, but they will no longer be required to take a day 8 test. In essence, this means that for fully vaccinated travellers, the requirements for green and amber list countries are the same. To be clear, a full vaccination means 14 days have passed since your final dose of the vaccine. And it's also important to note that health matters are devolved. So decision-making and implementation may differ across UK administrations, and we'll continue to work with the devolved administrations to ensure we achieve our shared objectives of safe, sustainable, robust return to international travel. Madam Deputy Speaker, the change I'm announcing today will prioritise those vaccinated in the United Kingdom. However, as I made clear last week, we want to welcome international visitors back to the UK and are working to extend our approach to vaccinated passengers from important markets and holiday destinations later this summer, such as the United States and the EU. And I'll update the House in due course on how we approach vaccinated individuals from other countries. When I highlighted the potential policy to the House last week, I explained that we needed to take some additional time to look at how children and the evidence around children who will not, of course, have been able to benefit from vaccines would be treated. I can tell the House today that children under 18 returning from amber list countries will not have to isolate on their return nor take a day 8 test. Children between the ages of 5 and 10 will only need to take a day 2 test, and as before, children 4 and under will be exempt from all testing and isolation requirements. I know this was a big concern of families, and after working with the scientists and public health experts, I'm delighted to be able to offer that reassurance today. The success of our vaccine programme has been aided by those selflessly creating the great benefits for society and the rest of the world by being a part of those clinical trials, without which we wouldn't have this vaccine programme. We're committed to ensuring that they are not disadvantaged as a result of being part of those trials, and I'm delighted to announce that those on approved clinical trials in the UK will also not need to self-isolate or take that day 8 test from an amber list country. Passengers will need to, of course, be able to prove their vaccination status, and they'll do that either through the COVID Pass. Now, that's available on the main NHS app, not the COVID app, or via the accessible letter, which can be obtained by calling 119 for those without access to smartphones. Passengers returning to England will be asked to include their vaccination status on their passenger locator form if they wish to benefit from the exemption to self-isolate. And transport operators and carriers will be required to check passengers' proof of being fully vaccinated before they are able to get on the form of transport. The government's been working closely with international partners on restarting international travel safely through certification. I'm pleased to announce to the House today that more than 30 countries and territories are now recognising vaccine certification as part of entry requirements, and either accepting proof of vaccination letter or the NHS app itself, and we'll continue to increase that number so that the NHS app becomes the natural default. Passengers should, of course, check with the Foreign Office travel advice to understand the latest entry requirements and COVID-19 rules at their destination. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that travel is important, that many people have not been able to travel, of course, for the last year and a half. This is not just, of course, about holidays, eager as we are, I'm sure, for time in the sun, but this is also about reuniting families who've been apart throughout this pandemic. It's about helping businesses to trade and grow, and it's about supporting aviation, a sector which hundreds of thousands of jobs rely on. An industry which this government has backed through £7 billion of support through this pandemic. And as the industry tell me, the support is, of course, very welcome, but the only way to actually recover is to allow them to fly and for travel to resume again. Which is why I'm pleased to also announce today that from the 19th of July, we'll remove the guidance that people should not travel to countries on the amber list. And this means that people will be able to travel for leisure, for business, and see family to amber list countries. I'm sure the whole House will welcome this development and approach to international travel. However, I want to be clear that as we begin to ease restrictions, travel will not be the same as it was before in, say, 2019. People should continue to check Foreign Office travel advice, travel where possible outside of busy weekend times, and importantly, they should expect that their experience at the border will of course be different because longer waiting times will be necessitated by risks, even as we introduce and expand the range of e-gates available to read the passenger locator forms. I must also make clear that public health remains our key priority, and that's why we'll not make any changes to requirements applying to those arriving from countries on the red list, even where they are fully vaccinated. The measures I've announced today have been designed in close cooperation with my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, along with medical and scientific experts, to ensure we can continue to minimise the risk of new variants. And as many of us know from personal travel experience, the government won't hesitate to act if required, and the data suggests that needs to happen. In other words, to put this on the record, an amber list country could still turn red, necessitating a change in behaviour when we return to the UK, and indeed, if a country goes into red, mandatory hotel quarantine. The UK has achieved many hard-won gains through our successful vaccination programme, through the continued spirit and determination of the British people. We can continue to encourage people to take up the vaccine when offered, not only to protect themselves, but also to restore previous freedoms more safely. 19th of July will mark the next step of this cautious reopening of international travel. And thanks to this government's incredible success with the vaccine programme, people in England will be able to travel more easily, visit their family and friends who they've not seen for such a long time, and also get business moving again, kick-starting our economy while keeping the UK safe and supporting a wide range of jobs and industries in the process. Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
We now go to the Shadow Secretary of State, Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of the statement this morning? Madam Deputy Speaker, when I questioned the Secretary of State on publishing the data, he said the JCVI and Public Health England do indeed publish their methodology and the data behind it for each of these countries. It's already published. However, the assessment to the 15th of June only has published limited data on 22 countries. And even with this very limited data, it shows absolutely no data for incoming passenger testing, no data for new variant testing for some of the countries that were moved to the green list, including the Balearics. The debate last time focused on India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, yet none of those countries have had the data published. Nor have the countries which are critical to our economy, including the US, Canada and the vast majority of the EU. When the full data is published, will he ensure that it shows a very clear direction of travel for each and every country to instill travel confidence once more? And will he finally allow a full review of the delay in adding India to the red list alongside Pakistan and Bangladesh, which led to the rapid spread of the Johnson variant, which he knows has delayed restrictions being eased here in the UK. It's also noted, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in just a week, the government has effectively taken our suggestion to effectively scrap the confused amber list. But it isn't clear if some of the countries that are currently on the amber list should in fact be moved to the red list. Can he confirm that a country-by-country assessment was carried out ahead of the statement being made today? Madam Deputy Speaker, as he'll know, Labour has been calling for the introduction of an international vaccine passport. He states that an agreement has been reached with 30 countries to accept UK vaccination status. So far, that list hasn't been published, and it's not clear what pre-testing and arrival testing will be needed. I welcome a common sense approach which will allow children to travel with their vaccinated parents and carers. And he confirmed that all of the 30 countries which he says will now accept the NHS vaccination status, that every single one of them will allow children to travel without additional restrictions. He will know that in addition to the uncertainty around the travel list, that the cost of testing is turning away would-be travellers. PCR tests often cost over £100 a person. The government could stop the rip-off we see with private testing companies, instead using spare capacity in the NHS testing sites, supported by an updated NHS app, which will also confirm testing status alongside vaccination status. We know that testing is a critical element of protecting the spread of COVID, so will he take forward these suggestions and finally make meaningful progress? Madam Deputy Speaker, when I asked the Secretary of State what action was being taken to open up transatlantic routes, he said that a US-UK working group had met the week before for the first time, yet no update has been provided on that today. So can I ask how many more times it's met since then and what progress has been made? Importantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, international travel community and the tourism sector needed the government to really step up, but I'm afraid ministers found themselves wanted. Labour is clear that the government must follow the example of other countries by intervening and bringing forward a sectoral deal to protect jobs. So can I ask the Minister why still the government haven't brought forward such a deal when the Chancellor promised it nearly a year ago? When I visited Heathrow last month, they noted that over a quarter of their cost base goes in fees and levy to government. If ministers don't want a support package that's holistic, can they at least look at the fees that are paid directly to government? And on Eurostar, why haven't they had the same business rate support as aviation? As an international travel operator, it should be a level playing field. And before I end, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did want to touch on the fact that this announcement didn't cover mask wearings. It's pretty clear that the government have been all over the place on mask wearing, despite masks reducing the risk of passing on the virus to other people, critically, especially on public transport. Why does the Secretary of State believe they should only now be subject to personal choice? And like me, will he commit to continuing to wear his mask on public transport?
State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman mentions the JCB data. The methodology is on the website, as I mentioned to him before. I'm sure they will continue to publish a fuller range of analysis as more countries are moved about. And of course, we've got the next review of the green, red and amber list on the 15th of July. India, he brings us up every time that we speak, and it doesn't matter how many times you explain the fact. We put them on the list 2 weeks before, on the red list. 2 weeks before they became a variant of concern, a week ahead of them being even a variant of interest, and yet he still continues to come to this House and say that time again. He mentions the list of 30 locations which are accepting either the NHS app or an NHS letter. They are already published. They're available on the FCDO website, and it gives me the opportunity to stress that when somebody travels to any location, they will want to use the FCDO website as the Bible for what will be the requirement on entry and departure from that country. I just wanted to update him on one late change, just so the House can note that it's not just children travelling with adults, it will be all children who will be exempt in the same way as somebody who's double vaccinated. He mentions the costs of tests. I've come to this dispatch box before and agreed that the costs of tests were too high, and I'm very pleased that since May the costs have continued to be driven down as over 400 providers are stepped up to the plate to produce these tests. I was looking this morning, there are tests as inexpensive as a tenner, albeit that those are tests in person, but there are quite a number of tests now for much lower prices than the ones that were previously being stated. The update on the working group with the US, UK that Biden and the Prime Minister announced is ongoing. Those meetings are taking place each and every week. As I've explained to the House before, there are quite a lot of technicalities to overcome, not least an executive order from the previous US administration, 212F, which actually bans travel for anyone who's been in the UK or Europe for the 14 days previous. And we're working through all those issues with them. They're being held at official level currently. In terms of support for the industry, I think it's a pity today that the Honourable Gentleman didn't reflect what the industry itself is saying. I noticed that the Airport Operators Association is saying this is a significant step forward, that they widely welcome it, that they say that people will be able to get away on a well-deserved break. The Airlines UK, who represent the airlines, say this is a positive move towards genuinely reopening the sector, and they warmly welcome it once again. And I have to say, when the Honourable Gentleman says Labour had been clear, he says, it's anything but clear. What is clear is there's a division between him and the Shadow Home Secretary. Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, they wanted quarantine lessened. Then they wanted everyone in a hotel. Then they wanted it to be done on a case-by-case basis. Then they wanted to shut down travel, open up travel, put everyone on a red list and more countries to the green list. Mr. Speaker, this isn't a policy, it's just plain politics.
Mrs. Theresa May.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that I welcome his statement today. This is the first step in opening up Britain for business. But I note in his statement he said that people should expect their experience at the border may be different, with longer waiting times than before. When queues at the border have been a problem in the past, extra staff have been brought in, including from other government departments, to support Border Force. Will my right honourable friend, on behalf of the government, guarantee that every effort will be made to bring in extra resources, deploy staff in different ways, including changing staff rotas at Border Force, in order to ensure that there can be a smooth movement of people through our borders and that we do not see inordinately long queues?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, and yes, I welcome my right honourable friend's intervention. She's absolutely right. In fact, I've been working with the Home Secretary and Border Force on exactly this issue. I should be perhaps a little bit more specific about where travellers might expect queues. Quite a lot of the checking will be done upstream, in other words, before you board the aircraft, typically, or it could be a train or a boat, from your location that you're coming back from. And so that queues at check-in whilst you're abroad may in fact be the place where those problems most exist. I know that many of the airlines are developing systems to further automate that check-in, but they will be doing quite a complicated job, checking the passenger locator form against the booked test still required on day 2, and of course vaccine status as well. So I just think it's fair to warn people who are travelling this summer that is something that we haven't had to do before, but she's absolutely right to say that it's important that the borders at this end are as smooth as possible. Indeed, a lot of investments going into automating all of that.
SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of the statement. I should start by saying I share the Honourable Member for Oldham's concerns about the lack of transparency in the data, and I have to say the Secretary of State's answers simply aren't good enough in that. We need to see more data and more quickly than are at the moment. And I have to say the Secretary of State is, and whilst I do welcome the thrust of the statement, the Secretary of State is being just a little disingenuous when he says in the statement that the industry tells him that support is welcome, but they need to get flying again. That in and of itself is of course correct, but what he didn't say is that industry is still crying out for further support, because most of the industry has not had grant support despite being the hardest hit sector in the economy. I've said a number of times now in the last few weeks that Glasgow Airport in my constituency has lost a third of the workforce that's based on site. That's 2,000 jobs gone locally at the airport, and well over another 1,000 jobs beyond the airport connected to aviation. And in terms of the Scottish summer season is already well over 2 weeks old, and by the time this policy kicks in for England, teachers in my area will be back in schools 3 weeks thereafter, so it's a very short window that remains. So the government must extend furlough for the sector, no ifs, no buts, and whilst this announcement will help, the number of passengers will still be significantly down, so the need for a sector-specific support package is still very clear. And from the outset, the Scottish Government have said that caution is required regarding international travel, and people should think very carefully about travelling abroad as situations can suddenly change. The Scottish Government will continue to work closely with the other home nations and are cautiously supportive of exploring options for the easing of restrictions for fully vaccinated travellers arriving from countries on the amber list, but only if the clinical advice supports it and if systems are in place to ensure the wider safety of the Scottish population. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that rumours for months have circulated about robust cabinet discussions on international travel, with often, amongst others, the previous Health Secretary and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster on one side, and the Chancellor and the Secretary of State on the other. And one can't help note the change of pace and the changes to international travel now that the new Health Secretary is in place. But I wonder, how can plans for an ambitious return of travel be made if the UK Government's rush to unlock domestically means, with 100,000 cases a day, etc., means other countries close their borders to UK travellers? And then lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, as has been said, mask wearing on aircraft, indeed in all public transport, is to most of us a no-brainer. And as he didn't address the Shadow Secretary of State's question, I'll ask again, will mask wearing on aircraft be compulsory, and will the Secretary of State confirm if he will continue to wear masks on all public transport?
State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I just should point out the change of pace is because we now have a situation where the majority of adults in the UK are vaccinated, and that was not fully vaccinated. And that was not the case. It wasn't the case a month ago when we postponed Step 4. It is the case now, and I can confirm to the Honourable Gentleman I was already discussing these changes with the previous Health Secretary, in fact. He's absolutely right. I did omit to mention about masks, and I should just bring the House up to speed. We will be still in guidance providing information about mask wearing. We know that it's sensible in more enclosed spaces, and I will wear a mask personally where it is appropriate to do so, and the airlines have already said it's a condition of carriage in, I think, all the cases that I've seen, and where it's a condition of carriage, of course, we would always wear it. On the other hand, if you're in an empty carriage on a long distance train for many hours, then people will use their common sense, and it's something on this side of the House we absolutely applaud and agree with. We're pleased to be able to get back to a guidance situation. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, when I hear the Honourable Gentleman quite frequently, he is a doughty campaigner for Glasgow Airport, and he often challenges me on this, I have to say to him that he might want to look a little bit closer to home. It's only very recently, in June, that the Scottish Government banned Scots from travelling to Manchester. As a direct result, EasyJet cancelled new routes which would have connected a whole bunch of Scottish airports. And no wonder the Scottish Passenger Agents Association has said that the Scottish Government is sacrificing them in their approach to aviation. So I think a lot of the answers that he's looking for, I'm afraid, are close to home. Meanwhile, the UK Government has provided £7 billion of support to the sector, and this opening up today, I notice so far, has yet to be reflected by announcements by the Scottish Government as well. If he really wants to help, I think he can help move along the policy in Scotland as well.
Chair of the Transport Select Committee, Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Rejoice, rejoice. This is a much-needed shot in the arm for those who've had 2 shots of the vaccine in their arm, and for an industry and workforce who have been laid low during the pandemic, perhaps more than others, but have always been confident and steadfast in their belief that we can all travel safely again. So in welcoming this announcement, can I ask the Secretary of State to also keep an eye on the testing regime? We know that for the last couple of months, those who have come back from amber destinations, only 0.4% of those have tested positive for COVID. So can we perhaps look at the testing costs? They are still a barrier for those travelling. It would be great if, rather than having an expensive PCR test, lateral flow could be used instead, and those who do test positive could then use a PCR. Those kind of ideas I would really look for the Secretary of State to keep on championing, and can he make sure that the Foreign Office advice and website is as up to date as he is on this matter?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. He does a superb job as the chair of the Select Committee and has been very consistent in his support for the aviation sector. He'll be interested to know, as the whole House will, that we'll have a further review date of this on the 31st of July. That's a checkpoint for the rules themselves, so that will be the date. Currently, the scientific evidence is that PCR tests, in addition to being a bit more accurate, are also the ones which can be quickly a sequence for the genome to look for variants as well. And his points about the FCDO and ensuring that all of that advice ties together are well understood, and we'll make sure we work closely with that department.
Rachel Messel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week, both the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have warned of a considerable spike in the level of infections, perhaps 100,000 positive cases detected every day. This clearly is going to put pressure on our testing services, but also will have a chilling effect on inbound travel, as people will have choices to travel to nations where there is a lower infection rate. As a result of that, what kind of compensation is he looking to bring forward to the travel industry for many of the companies in my constituency who have really struggled over the last year because of the lack of government support? And will we ensure that that support is long-term so that these companies can have that bridge into their future?
Well, it is, of course, true to say that there is a third wave with the Delta variant. We're in the fortunate position in the United Kingdom of having this exceptional vaccination programme, which has enabled us to, on the 19th of July, provided that it's confirmed on Monday, open up. I've described from the dispatch box today how we'll allow people who've been vaccinated through the UK vaccination programme to travel again and come back and treat those amber countries as if they're green. We will, on the other side of that, work on a phase 2, which will enable people to travel here. And I'm working closely with the Culture Secretary to ensure that can restart as soon as is possible. We need to be able to trust their vaccination programme and be able to qualify that they've had a particular type of test, of course. And that is the best way to help those travel firms in her constituency. And I must just pick up, £7 billion is not a drop in the ocean. It is a lot of money that's been used to support the travel sector. We're proud to have done so, but the very best thing will be to get the sector opened up again.
We now go via video link to Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This announcement is a big step forward in the right direction and will provide a much needed boost for the travel sector. So I really do welcome what the Secretary of State has said. It will provide a meaningful choice as well for holiday destinations for families looking to go abroad this summer. However, as the chair of the Transport Select Committee has already touched on, the Secretary of State will be aware that testing requirements remain both costly and burdensome, especially for families going forward. So noting he mentions the date of the 31st of July, I note that, but will he also commit to keeping the testing under regular reviews? And also, can he look not just at the cost, but also the bureaucracy that goes with this, and it does have an impact on families going on holiday?
Secretary of State.
I certainly welcome my honourable friend's welcome of the policy. And on the cost of tests, I do just want, because what tends to happen is the narrative runs a bit behind what's actually happening in the real world. So I jumped on the gov.uk website this morning to take a look at myself. There are some very inexpensive tests. I think the cheapest I saw was £4.95. Now, that's actually quite specific because it referred to somebody turning up at an individual test centre. They may not live anywhere near to it. So let's assume, though, that the tests are higher than the cost of tests are higher than that, but also recognise that they're no longer at the hundreds of pounds that were being quoted in the spring. I want to see that continue to be driven down. I do give him my assurance that we'll carry on working with the scientists and looking at the data. We won't be testing people for a moment longer than is required, but our primary responsibility, of course, is to protect people in the UK. We do not want to have a variant come in that we simply fail to pick up.
Now go via video link to Ben Bradshaw.
I warmly welcome this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker. It finally restores to us some of the freedoms our European neighbours and Americans have been enjoying for some considerable time. But if I understood the Secretary of State correctly, the green list testing requirements will still leave travel more restricted this summer than it was last summer when we didn't have the vaccines. And of course, reciprocity, as he will understand, is absolutely vital when it comes to travel. And the lack of immediate reciprocity for other countries means they're less likely to open up to us anytime soon. So why, when many European countries already accept our vaccine passport, are we incapable of accepting theirs now?
Thank you very much. Well, of course, reciprocity is very important in this, and I've already explained the situation with the United States. Reciprocity would involve them not having Executive Order 212F in place, of course. That would immediately relieve some of the issues there. They do still have 50 different ways to verify tests because there's no central system. Each state has its own version. The European example is a better one, as he says. I am working very closely with my European counterparts in regular contact, and we wanted to have a first phase in place as quickly as possible, easy to verify through the UK vaccine programme, but we will move as quickly as possible, I think, to satisfy his concerns about working with other countries, including the EU digital passport.
We now go via video link to Mark Harper.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome this statement from the Secretary of State and also his restatement of the significant financial support given to the sector. What's his judgment about whether these changes that have been announced will allow the sector to stand on its own feet from a business viability perspective, or are we still going to have to put significant sums of public money into it? This is a debate that we need to have. Every bit of caution that people advocate comes with a price tag that has to be met by the taxpayer, and that debate, I think, is essential as we go forward.
I think it's worth reflecting that this country is leading the way. I was having a look at which other countries, certainly in Europe, major economies are going for an unlock as we expect and hope to do on the 19th, subject to confirmation next Monday. And I don't see any other country who are opening up domestically quite as much. And it is time, as I think I know he agrees, to learn to live with the coronavirus. We have many advantages this year that we didn't have last year. Easily available testing, much reduced in price, vaccination, immunisation for people, all adults being able to access it. And that does mean that we can move to what will, I think, become the new world of aviation. I think to answer his question, in my conversations with the aviation sector in particular, many of them have downsized. They're now ready to start upsizing gradually as we come out of, I think, what has been the most horrendous couple of years on record for that sector.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Not only has the government's hotel quarantine policy been an utter mess, the handling of complaints and legitimate calls for exemption have been painfully slow through official channels. I've had toddlers left without milk, kids so poorly nourished in these hotels that ambulances have been called out. Some people have been left without access to drinking water, and families in Luton are being charged nearly £2,500 for this. Can the Secretary of State tell me who is making a profit on these astronomical charges, and why is there no discount for people on low incomes?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to highlight these cases and fight for her constituents. I do just want to point out that the figure that is charged at the moment does not make a profit for the government. In fact, it's still being somewhat subsidised in the process. I also want to point out that people should not be travelling to red list countries. So, the only people who should be coming back to quarantine, government quarantine, are British or Irish citizens or people with permanent rights of residence. And there should be a limit to the number of people who are still abroad and wishing to return. So I do just want to stress, I do sometimes come across cases where people are still using the red list as if it's okay, I can come back in hotel quarantine. That should not be the case. However, if she has individual cases, I'm concerned to hear about them. The system is handled by the Department of Health, and I'd be very happy to pass them on.
Number 10 is withdrawn, so we go to Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has quite rightly sounded a note of caution that anyone who chooses to travel to an amber list country needs to be prepared for the possibility that it becomes a red list country before the return. What happens if someone has booked to travel to an amber list country and it becomes red before they travel? Has he had discussions with the travel industry and the travel insurance industry to determine whether passengers in those circumstances will be entitled to a refund, or will they simply have to sacrifice a holiday and lose all their money?
Well, I have to say the travel industry, I think, has actually stepped up to the plate on this by and large. And we're seeing a situation where nearly everywhere where you could book, and I just encourage consumers to take a look, you're able to guarantee a refund or a change of date if there's a change in status, and holiday insurance become quite adept at this as well. Governments also try to assist. So, for example, we've introduced, it used to be with ABTA that you could, with ATOL, that you would be able to get only a cash refund. We've made those vouchers effectively government guaranteed, so people can take them with assurance, and that of course is helping the travel sector as well to weigh up their difficulties in cash flow. So I'm working very closely to answer his question with the travel industry. He's absolutely right to raise the case. The most important thing people can do is check before they book, particularly now, particularly this year, to make sure that refunds and rebooking is allowed within the contract.
Now go via video link to Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. His statement will be a lifeline to the aviation industry that he's done so much to try to support throughout the pandemic. Inbound tourism clearly is very important to the economy of the United Kingdom, and I therefore hope that he will be successful in swiftly ensuring that overseas visitors, not just returning British passengers, will be able to enter into the United Kingdom relatively easily and safely. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that my right honourable friend will also be able to work with the FCDO to seek to ensure that all World Health Organization approved vaccines are accepted in overseas countries, and particularly including, of course, the countries of the European Union like France. Finally, and referring back to the issue raised by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, about queues at border posts, will my right honourable friend ensure that not only at airports, but also at the channel ports particularly, there are facilities to ensure the swift flow of passengers?
Thank you very much. I would say that I absolutely hear the call for inbound tourism. I've heard it from both sides of the House. We are working on that as a phase 2. There are, of course, some further complications in terms of how to accept different proof of vaccine, but I absolutely agree with the idea that we should, of course, be accepting vaccines which have been approved by the World Health Organisation as a very good basis for this. He makes an excellent point about not just airports, but other types of ports, and of course those across the Channel Tunnel are some of the busiest in the country. I do think it is right to tell people that these additional checks are likely to cause delays potentially on both sides of the border of the Channel this summer, and that people will want to prepare and plan their journeys with supplies, and also ensuring that they have picked the best time of day to travel in order to avoid it. But I'm working already very, very closely with my French counterpart to try to minimise any delays as much as possible.
Now go via video to Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also welcome today's statement by the Secretary of State. However, the latest ONS stats on the coronavirus job retention scheme show that 57% of employees in the passenger air transport sector remain on furlough. Can the Secretary of State tell me what discussions he has had with the Chancellor to extend the furlough to avoid a job crisis in the aviation sector before furlough ends?
Well, the furlough scheme, as the Honourable Lady knows, is part of a national scheme, UK-wide. It's supported those in aviation, but across the economy. Of course, it is starting to wind down through September, and that's why I think today's announcement is particularly timely, because it gives the ability for aviation and travel companies to get going again. And I do hope that closer to home, the Honourable Lady will put pressure on the Scottish Government to follow, because at the moment we seem to have a situation where there's more support being called for from Scottish members, but the most important thing of all, allowing these airlines to fly, doesn't seem to be forthcoming from the Scottish Government.
Sir David Amos.
Welcome my right honourable friend's statement today that not only football but air travel is coming home. And I will not repeat colleagues' points about clarity, testing, self-isolation, wearing of face masks and the rest of it. But will my right honourable friend please reassure me that as a result of his announcement there is absolutely no need for Southend Airport to stage more night flights, which really does cause a nuisance to local residents?
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend for shoehorning two things into this question. First of all, 45 minutes before anyone mentioned coming home and got it into aviation. And secondly, night flights, which is not entirely part of my announcement today. I know that Southend Airport is very important to his local economy. I won't comment on the night flights position specifically, but I was relieved to see that flights will be able to continue there after the operator experienced difficulties recently.
We now go via video link to Naz Shah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too welcome the statement from the Secretary of State this afternoon. However, what is he doing? I'd like to understand what he's doing to fix the issue with the quarantine hotels. My 34-week pregnant constituent who returned to the UK was quarantined in Greenwich in the O2 Arena, a Continental Hotel. On day 1 and 2, she ended up in hospital, was denied a travel to hospital on day 6 for a scan. By day 8, she lost her baby and spent 4 days in ICU because she nearly lost her life. Will he meet with me to discuss this and to ensure that we get quarantining right for families, and especially this tragic case for my constituent?
I welcome the honourable lady's welcome of the package, and I'm very, very sorry to hear about that situation that she outlines. It is the case that, of course, everybody in a quarantine hotel should have access to medical assistance. I'm not aware of the details, but I'm very happy to help arrange for the correct minister, which will actually be in the Department of Health, to meet with her to discuss her constituent's case.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I very much welcome the announcement from my right honourable friend today, which will make such a huge difference to families wanting to see their relatives, to businesses in my constituency, and of course people who also want to go on holiday. But can I come back to the point of reciprocity? Because while we can ease the measures domestically, of course it's what happens when you land on the other side that also impacts the ability for people to work, to see relatives, etc. And I think ideally, we want to have international safety standards and a sort of international approach which is synchronous across all nations. I was wondering if he could update the House in terms of his discussions taking that forwards.
I do want to pay tribute to my honourable friend's campaigning on this subject. He's done a great deal on talking about the safety standards and campaigning to get to a situation where we can help reopen things. He's right to talk about reciprocity as well, and he'll be interested to hear that I chaired a meeting of the G7 Transport Secretaries, my equivalents, earlier in the year, and I'll be doing so again later in the year. Our drive is to introduce those international standards because clearly coronavirus isn't going away anytime soon. We want to make sure that there's an internationally recognised system in place. So we're doing our part, since we happen to be chairing the G7, to make sure that those standards are recognised globally.
We now go via video link to Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We find ourselves in the position where previous failures of the UK government have left us as a centre for a new variant. So how does the Minister's plan for ending quarantine take account of keeping future new variants out and therefore the consequent impact that this may have on the ability of UK citizens to then travel?
Well, as I've explained, first of all, I don't accept the premises of his point. We have had one of the most rigorous border checks in place. In fact, I was in this House only last week where I think every single speaker from all sides of the House urged an opening up. So I'm interested to hear his views. But secondly, the steps in place are to still require a pre-departure test and still require a PCR test on or before day 2 in order that it can be sequenced, and of course all the other guidance which exists as well.
My video link to Henry Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Secretary of State's announcement today. It's absolutely the right measures to be taken. But can I encourage him to, as soon as possible, go further and look to expand the number of green list countries that international travel is possible to, particularly working on that US-UK travel task force, because it's estimated for every day we don't have meaningful transatlantic flights, it is costing the UK economy some £23 million per day.
Well, I do want to pay tribute to my honourable friend for all of his work and campaign on this subject. I know his constituency is very much impacted by the success or otherwise of aviation. In answer to his point, yes, we will certainly look at those countries which fall into the red, amber and green categories. For the purpose of clarity for the House, it's probably helpful for me to say that that review will take place next on the 15th of July, so not very long to wait. There are then 2 checkpoints, one on the 31st of July, that's looking at the system and its operation in total, and again on the 1st of October, which are already actually in the programme going forward.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, can I also thank the Secretary of State for his update as always. Would the Secretary of State outline what steps have been taken with the Republic of Ireland government to ensure that correct tests have been taken into assessment? This is an issue that my constituent and his pregnant wife had only on Monday past, in which Ryanair supplied tests was deemed to be insufficient, and around 300 people were placed in one of the quarantine hotels with no idea at all of just what had happened and what had went wrong. So how can the Secretary of State assure my constituents that the right information is conveyed to the travel sector so as to make international travel as smooth and as understandable as possible?
I wasn't familiar with that Republic of Ireland situation, but I will undertake to speak to my opposite number, we do speak regularly, and receive an update and perhaps write a letter back to the Honourable Gentleman with information to take the case further.
John Howell.
Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. I realise that this is not his decision, but what additional evidence does his statement provide to help the House of Commons authorities in their deliberations on whether my delegation can return to Europe?
Well, far be it from me to get between an honourable member and the House authorities, but I do have to say it is time for those delegations to be able to return. We have set out today a form of travel where amber can be treated as green, where double vaccination, or I should say full vaccination, because some people will have a single vaccination in the future, plus 14 days, provides reasons to travel. And I very much hope that that then brings to conclusion, I know this long-running situation where the Honourable Gentleman and others have not been able to travel to do important Council of Europe and other business.
We now go via video link to Anam Kosei Javed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The newly appointed Health Secretary has said that the UK Government's policy of returning to normal may lead to as many as 100,000 COVID cases per day. It's entirely possible that with these case rates, uncontrolled by the UK Government could lead to further curbs on UK travellers abroad. How will the Secretary of State's plans announced today accommodate these projected domestic case rates?
Well, I'm grateful for the question. I think it's important to know that we're in a different phase of this coronavirus now, where never before have we had the majority of our population double vaccinated, and everybody is welcome to come forward, and indeed should come forward if they haven't been for the vaccinations yet. The rest of the world isn't quite in that situation as yet. They will want to get themselves to that position, and increasingly, therefore, the focus isn't so much on the specific case rates. After all, we're not vaccinating children yet, and we wait for the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisation to let us know whether they wish to, whether it's scientifically proven to do so and advisable. But in the meantime, what we really are interested in is, of course, of the hospitalisations and deaths. Other countries will experience the same thing, and there's no reason, as we've seen throughout this coronavirus, to think that one country's epidemiological situation is different from another. We know that whilst we may have been suffering from the Delta variant, that other countries sadly will do in the future. I hope they can get themselves vaccinated in time.
And now go via video link to Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The whole travel industry will welcome today's decision, which will help build confidence in the industry and amongst passengers. Clear and concise guidance will be needed quickly for airports, airlines and travel agents to navigate the additional paperwork required to check passengers' vaccination status. But given that some people can't have the vaccine for medical reasons, what can be done to provide confidence that we aren't moving towards a two-tier society?
Well, he's absolutely right. The airline industry, for example, says they're looking forward to working with the government to continue this momentum and further open up markets, and I welcome his welcome of today's announcement. He's right as well to point out that there are some people, for various different reasons, I mentioned in my speech, people who've been on a trial, for example, who wouldn't qualify under the normal circumstances. The other set of people, of course, are people who are clinically unable to have vaccinations for various different reasons, and we will bring forward guidance on all of these issues.
Via video link to Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. My constituent, Tracy Crabb, has been double jabbed, but she's one of those who's had the Indian-manufactured COVID Shield version of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which the EU currently doesn't recognise in their digital certificate travel scheme. This is absolutely crazy, given this drug is no different to the AstraZeneca vaccine manufactured here. Some EEA countries have said they'll still accept COVID Shield, but most have not yet. And France apparently considers people with this jab as being unvaccinated. So what's he going to do to try and get some common sense on this issue so that Tracy and thousands like her can enjoy some of the international travel freedoms he's just announced?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman's absolutely right, of course. If it's recognised by the World Health Organisation, there is no excuse not to recognise it. We're working with our colleagues, friends and colleagues in the EU and elsewhere, and I'm pretty certain this situation will be resolved.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State to come to the House and making this statement, and also for all the work he does behind the scenes to support the travel industry. But I have a concern. If I understand the Secretary of State right, amber countries can now be travelled to. The restriction has gone. However, the Foreign and Commonwealth advice still today for countries is you can only go for non-essential, you shouldn't go for non-essential travel, for instance, Germany and Italy. So will that guidance be updated now for the July the 19th so that people can plan in advance?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I should explain two things. First of all, FCDO travel advice is about the danger for somebody in a country. And of course, that could be about COVID, but it also could be about political unrest or some other natural or other crisis going on in that country. So it is by necessity different from the traffic light system. The traffic light system is interested in the risks posed by that person having visited that country on their return to the UK. But he raises a very important point about the travel advice to people going to amber countries, which at the moment says don't for the purposes of holidays, for example. We will be changing that advice for the 19th to make it clear that people can travel for holiday and other reasons.
Tricia Gibson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I confess that I was quite surprised by the response that the Secretary of State gave to my colleague, the Honourable Member from Glenrothes, on the issue of travel insurance, given that consumer body which has found that many travellers are being left with a false impression about the travel insurance protection they would enjoy in the event of COVID-related disruption to their plans, with less than 1% of UK travel insurance policies providing people with full comprehensive cover for COVID-related disruption. In view of these concerns, will the Secretary of State undertake to discuss with the travel insurance industry to make sure that consumers can have confidence that they are appropriately covered in the event of disruption to their travel plans?
I want to be clear with the House. I mean, it has involved some sort of cajoling, I would describe it as, to ensure that the travel industry is in the right place more times than not. And I'm aware of the Which report she refers to. I'm also aware that the monopolies, the competition authorities, rather, have been looking at this, and in the case of one or two of the larger airlines have undertaken action. It is very important, and I hope that she will accept, the government is very much on the side of consumers, and we do want to see flexibility in the system. That's why we backed the ATOL system for vouchers to be accepted, to both make it easier for travellers but also for the industry, and we will do everything that we possibly can to assist. I'm very happy actually to accept her offer and arrange for the aviation minister, and perhaps with the appropriate ministers across government, to meet and discuss this issue with her.
Simon Feld.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I warmly welcome this announcement. It will be much relief to companies like Travel the Globe, based in my constituency, who are a very successful travel business who have struggled over the last 18 months of uncertainty, and also to families and individuals hoping to travel and reunite with family. But given that double vaccination is key to unlocking international travel, what message does my right honourable friend have to those who are still yet to book their second jabs?
One of the things that is important is people are fully vaccinated, and that means with the vaccines we're using at the moment, 2 jabs, and then you have to wait 14 days, and then you're able to use this new dispensation we've announced today on amber list travel and not have to quarantine. So the message is simple. If you haven't booked your second vaccination, you've had your first, please book. If you haven't booked your first, book that. We've reduced the waiting time to 8 weeks for those under 40. Please use this as the reason to get on the website and get yourself booked in for that second jab.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government made some major mistakes on our borders last year, but it is right that we move forward in a pragmatic and sensible way now in light of the success of the vaccine rollout. And I've heard from many constituents and working in the travel industry in Cardiff South and Penarth, and many small travel companies who have been hit hard by this crisis and want to see international travel resume in a safe way. But can the Minister just be absolutely clear about the situation for residents in Wales? He talks here of UK residents who are fully vaccinated through the UK vaccine rollout will not have to quarantine if they come back to England. Obviously, we will expect announcements in due course from the devolved administrations about their own ports and airports. But Welsh residents coming back into a UK airport, Heathrow or somewhere like that, they will not have to quarantine. Is that correct?
Yes, I do want to stress that this is an announcement that I'm making for England, that we're working closely with the devolved administrations. There is, of course, only one international airport in Wales, which is Cardiff, and I very much look forward to the administration there coming to their own conclusions. They will also need to describe what happens, as was the case when we had country changes on the corridor, on and off the corridor list, to travellers who come to an English airport and then wish to travel across the border. I am sure that between him and I, we can convince them to do the right thing, get on board with this, and enable both English and Welsh to travel with ease.
Now have a video link to Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise to the Minister if I missed it, but I didn't hear one word of his statement about the international cruise ship industry, an industry which has now fulfilled the government's request for a crisis workshop with foreign Commonwealth and development officers, and they've taken the extraordinary step of agreeing to a memorandum of understanding on repatriation. Can the Minister reassure the international cruise ship industry that as he talks about increasing traffic between international airports and he talks about opening the international economy, that he will not neglect the international cruise ship industry and the 88,000 plus UK jobs that are reliant on it?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to stress the importance of the cruise industry, and he'll be pleased when I tell him that these moves do include cruises from the 19th of July. Indeed, we've enabled cruise ships to sail already with up to 50% where people have been double vaccinated. So yes, they're included, but I do have to say to the Honourable Gentleman, it is a frustration that we have been allowing cruise ships in English waters, but they have been banned from docking at Scottish ports for the last month or two. If he really wants to help those 80,000 people employed by the cruise sector, maybe he can start by talking to the Scottish Government about that.
Now go by video link to Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and I've listened very carefully to his answers. Can I ask him just to clarify two of those answers? Firstly, in regard to the amber list review, if one is on the amber list on the 31st of July, by implication, it will still be on the amber list until the 1st of October. Is that correct? And given that Verify and the EU digital travel passport are already in place, how quickly does he expect the UK to be able to join schemes and allow all foreign fully vaccinated travellers to come to the UK?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must caution that the House and everybody listening that, of course, it is the case, whilst opening up today and making these announcements, that an amber list country could, in theory, switch to being a red list country. I can provide him no such guarantee that from July to October there may not be changes. There could be. Nonetheless, I think most people realise by this stage that the path of the coronavirus is unpredictable, and I hope that this double vaccination measure provides some reassurance. So it can change quickly, and I do want to reassure my honourable friend that we will always act in the best, to the best benefit of people and securing their health going forward.
Question to Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome my right honourable friend's statement. Can you consider issuing some separate guidance for business travellers who have multiple short visits abroad? Clearly, it's self-evident you can't take a test 3 days before returning if you've only got a 1 or a 2 day visit. So, given that many business travellers will undertake such visits, will he issue that? And can he also give a commitment to publish the criteria on which the decision to place a country in green, amber or red is taken? Because if the travel industry knew what the criteria were and the methodology, they would have an idea of the direction of travel rather than having sudden events imposed and deadlines imposed upon them.
So, sure, well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to mention the case of, for example, a business traveller who might go from A to B to C. One of the things which is little noticed is that the test is up to day 2. It's not a day 2 test. Per se. I think it might be helpful, though, if I were to write to him in more detail about the application and how that would work under this new system with regard to, for example, somebody travelling perhaps for business to many different places. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to tell my right honourable friend that on the gov.uk website, the methodology for the JBC is already set out, and it does include subsections of a number of different criteria applied. I often hear people say, X country has fewer cases than we do, so why aren't they on the green list? The answer is probably they're not sequencing their genome, they're not uploading it to the GIS aid internationally recognised format, perhaps they're not vaccinating people at quite the rate that we have. So there are many different factors, but they are all set out by the JCB.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes to make arrangements for the next business.
Order. I call the Prime Minister to make a statement. Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement on the UK's policy towards Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda leadership had turned Afghanistan into the epicenter of global terrorism, where, in the words of the author Ahmed Rashid, everything was available: training, funding, communications, and inspiration. And it was in the mountain ranges of this sanctuary that Al-Qaeda operated a formidable network of terrorist training camps, drilling and indoctrinating thousands of recruits. The terrorists who acquired their murderous skills in Afghanistan, or who were organised from its soil, dispersed across the world, inflicting bloodshed and tragedy on 3 continents. They detonated truck bombs in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in 1998, killing 224 people. They attacked the USS Cole in Aden in 2000, killing 17 people. And then they perpetrated their most heinous atrocity, claiming almost 3,000 lives in New York, Pennsylvania and Washington on September the 11th, 2001. Today, thankfully, the situation is very different. The training camps have been destroyed. What remains of Al-Qaeda's leadership no longer resides in Afghanistan, and no terrorist attacks against Western targets have been mounted from Afghan soil since 2001. We should never lose sight of these essential facts. On the morning after September the 11th, few would have predicted that no more terrorist attacks on that scale would be launched from Afghanistan in the next 20 years. These gains were achieved by an American-led military intervention mounted with overwhelming international support, including troops from dozens of countries, and the first and only invoking of NATO's Article 5 security guarantee. And we can take pride that Britain was part of that effort from the beginning. Over the last 2 decades, 150,000 members of our armed forces have served in Afghanistan, mainly in Helmand province, which was, from 2006 onwards, a focus of our operation. In the unforgiving desert of some of the world's harshest terrain and shoulder to shoulder with the Afghan security forces, our servicemen and women sought to bring development and stability. The House will join with me in commending their achievements and paying heartfelt tribute to the 457 British service personnel who laid down their lives in Afghanistan to keep us safe. We always acted in the closest partnership with the government and people of Afghanistan, and we owe an immense debt to the translators and other locally employed staff who risked their lives alongside British forces. We have already helped more than 1,500 former Afghan staff and their families to begin new lives here in the UK. This year we adopted a new policy offering priority relocation to the UK to any current or former locally employed staff assessed to be under serious threat to their lives, together with their close families. British diplomats and development experts worked alongside our allies to rebuild the country, opening schools and clinics where there had been none, and bringing safe water and electricity to millions of people for the first time. Anyone who lives in comfort as we do should not underestimate the importance of their advances. In Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, virtually no girls attended school. They were, as a matter of declared policy, driven from the classroom and forbidden from returning. Today, 3.6 million girls are going to school in Afghanistan, seizing their chance to escape from illiteracy and poverty. The Girls' Education Challenge Fund, established by the British government, has helped over 250,000 Afghan girls into the classroom. And our priority now must be to work alongside our Afghan and other partners to preserve these vital gains and the legacy of what has been achieved. Under the Taliban, women were excluded from governance. Today, women hold over 1/4 of the seats in Afghanistan's parliament. And since 2002, over 5 million refugees have returned to Afghanistan under the UN's voluntary repatriation programme, aided by the fact that Britain the UN, and our Afghan and international partners have together cleared over 8.4 million landmines or other unexploded munitions, restoring 340,000 acres of land for productive use. In 2018, Herat province was declared free of mines after 10 years of painstaking work by the Halo Trust based in Dumfriesshire in a UK-funded programme. So no one should doubt the gains of the last 20 years, but nor can we shrink from the hard reality of the situation today. The international military presence in Afghanistan was never intended to be permanent. We and our NATO allies were always going to withdraw our forces. The only question was when, and there could never be a perfect moment. As long ago as 2014, the UK ceased all combat operations and brought the great majority of our troops home, reorientating our role and our involvement. About 750 service personnel stayed in Afghanistan under NATO's mission to train and assist the country's security forces. Last year, the US decided to withdraw its troops from Afghanistan while the Taliban undertook to prevent, and I quote, any group or individual, including Al-Qaeda, from using the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the security of the United States and its allies. President Biden announced in April that all American forces would leave by September at the latest. And the NATO summit declared last month that the alliance's military operations in Afghanistan were coming to an end. As a result, all British troops assigned to NATO's mission in Afghanistan are now returning home. And for obvious reasons, I will not disclose the timetable of our departure, though I can tell the House that most of our personnel have already left. I hope that no one will lead to the false conclusion that the withdrawal of our forces somehow means the end of Britain's commitment to Afghanistan. We are not about to turn away, nor are we under any illusions about the perils of today's situation and what may lie ahead. We always knew that supporting Afghanistan would be a generational undertaking, and we were equally clear that the instruments in our hands would change over time. Now, we shall use every diplomatic and humanitarian lever to support Afghanistan's development and stability. We will back the Afghan state with over £100 million of development assistance this year and £58 million for the Afghan National Security and Defence Forces. And we will, of course, continue to work alongside our Afghan partners against the terrorist threat. Our diplomats are doing everything they can to support a lasting peace settlement within Afghanistan, and they are working for regional stability, particularly by promoting better relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And here I commend General Carter, the Chief of the Defence Staff, for his steadfast efforts. I spoke to President Ghani on the 17th of June to assure him of the UK's commitment, and I was moved once again to hear his tribute to the British soldiers who strove so hard to give the Afghan people better lives. We must be realistic about our ability alone to influence the course of events. It will take combined efforts of many nations, including Afghanistan's neighbours, to help the Afghan people to build their future. But the threat that brought us to Afghanistan in the first place has been greatly diminished by the valour and by the sacrifice of the armed forces of Britain and many other countries. We are safer because of everything they did. Now we must persevere alongside our friends for the same goal of a stable Afghanistan, but with different tools in our hands, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Opposition Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement? And can I also, first of all, give my apologies on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, who is on a long-planned visit to meet political leaders in Northern Ireland. And may I also associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister regarding the British service personnel and the collective efforts of our partners in NATO. This is a profound moment for more than 150,000 UK personnel who have served in Afghanistan during the last 20 years, including my honourable friends, the members for Barnsley Central and Norwich South, and many more honourable members across this House. My own brother too served in the British Armed Forces during that period, so I know how it feels to say goodbye to a loved one before a tour of duty. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, I do not know how it feels not to see your loved one come home again, and the pain that those families have gone through is unimaginable. Hundreds of British men and women lost their lives in the service of our country. Many more were wounded or injured and still suffer the physical and emotional scars. They have shown extraordinary bravery, skill and courage. So today, Mr. Speaker, to everyone who served in Afghanistan and to all that loved them and supported them, we say a huge thank you. There have been moments of huge difficulty in the last 2 decades, and the situation on the ground in Afghanistan today is more concerning than at any other point in many years. That must not take away from the many positives of our engagement has brought to Afghanistan and the real difference our services and development sector have made in a country that has suffered so much. We have supported improvements in security, in governance, in economic development and, as the Prime Minister said, in advancing the rights of women and education for girls. Yet these gains have not been secured. The Taliban are making gains on the ground and serious questions remain about the future stability of Afghanistan. A security threat remains to the wider world, including to the UK. And nobody wants to see British troops permanently stationed in Afghanistan, but we simply cannot wash our hands or walk away. It's hard to see a future without bloodier conflict and wider Taliban control. Already, they are on the brink of gaining control of provincial capitals, and Afghan security forces are at risk of being overwhelmed. This, Mr. Speaker, spells jeopardy for the Afghan people, particularly for Afghan women and girls, and all the things that the Prime Minister talked about earlier, who just in a just world would have had the same rights as women everywhere deserve. And in the words of the Prime Minister himself, this is a situation fraught with risk, and I understand that. So can he tell us if he argued for or against the withdrawal of the US government and in NATO, and what other steps he proposed? Our British troops made enormous sacrifices, and we believe, as a nation, we have a responsibility to our veterans. Can the Prime Minister really tell them that our work as a nation in Afghanistan is done, and their efforts will not be in vain? On their behalf, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister, what plans are now in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not become a failed state and a breeding ground for those that wish to oppress their own citizens and threaten ours, and what additional threat does our country now face? What diplomatic plans will be in place in the region to support the peace process? And is the government, UK government, engaging with the government of Pakistan about its role? And will the UK embassy in Kabul remain? And how will we keep our UK staff there safe? Afghanistan remains one of the most poorest countries in the world. Yet our aid funding to that country is being cut by more than £100 million he referred to today. The UK funded a project of 6,000 women that has already been cancelled. When he visited Kabul, as the Foreign Secretary, he said that girls' education was our crowning achievement. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what impact his cuts to the aid budget will have on programmes there, and will he not rethink those cuts again? Mr. Speaker, I reiterate that we all want to see an end to UK military operations in Afghanistan. But if we leave without putting a plan in place to ensure that Afghanistan does not go back to the conflict and violence of the past, then we would have failed those that have given so much over the last 20 years. Building and maintaining the peace and prosperity of Afghanistan, protecting women and girls, and in turn protecting our own nation should always be our priority. To honour the legacy of those that have served and the lives that were lost, let's make sure, Prime Minister, we get this right.
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for what she said, particularly the spirit in which she said it. Let me try and address some of her points. It is clear that what is happening now is a follow-up to what was very largely the withdrawal, the end of military operations in 2014. The presence since then has been much smaller, but a great deal of good work has continued to be done by British aid workers, by British Armed Forces, and by British diplomats. And she's right to draw attention to the work of educating girls and young women. I think the whole country can be proud of what has been achieved, and I can reassure her by saying that actually this country will not only continue to fund education in Afghanistan, to continue to support Afghanistan to the tune of £100 million, as I said, but we will also increase our funding for the Global Partnership for Education, and we'll be making further announcements about that later this month, when the Global Partnership for Education takes place here in London. And she asks the most important question, which I think veterans of the Afghan conflict will want to know, which is whether we think that the threat from Afghanistan has now been reduced. And the answer is yes, we do think the threat from Al-Qaeda is very substantially lower than it was in 2001. There remain threats, of course, from the Islamic State de Khorasan, from the Haqqani network. Of course there remain terrorist threats from Afghanistan. But the answer is to have a peaceful and a negotiated solution, and that is what our diplomats will continue to work for. And I would just say to the Taliban, they've made the commitment that I read out to the House in their negotiations with General Khalilzad. They must abide by those commitments. And they should, I'm sure that they will be aware that there is no military path. There is no military path to victory for the Taliban. There must be a peaceful and a negotiated settlement for the political crisis in Afghanistan. And the UK will continue to work to ensure that that takes place. And I believe that that can happen. I don't believe that the Taliban are guaranteed the kind of victory that you sometimes read about, Mr. Speaker, and the UK will continue to exert all its diplomatic and political efforts to ensure that there is a better future for the people of Afghanistan, for the women of Afghanistan, for young people growing up in Afghanistan, and that the legacy of those 150,000 British serving men and women who went through Afghanistan, and above all the 457 who laid down their lives, that their legacy is properly honoured, Mr. Speaker.
Comes to the Church Select Committee, Tom Tribune.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I first of all say thank you to the Prime Minister for coming and giving this statement himself. This is an enormously personal issue for me. I didn't meet the Honourable Member for Barnsley Central here or in any of the clubs or think tanks around Westminster. I met him about 20 miles to the west of Garmsir in the desert as we were fighting side by side against the enemies he's just listed. And the achievements that he has listed were won with the blood of my friends, and I can point him to the graves where they now lay, because that legacy is now one that is in real doubt, and we know it. And we know that it's not just his decision. We know that the US decision to withdraw forces was fundamental here. But can he explain to me, how does Britain's foreign policy work in a country like Afghanistan? If persistence isn't persistent, if endurance doesn't endure, then how can people trust us as an ally? How can people look at us as a friend? This reminds me not of Vietnam, but of Germany in 1950, at a time when we could have walked away. We could have said, it's too expensive, it's too difficult to rebuild. Let's let Stalin have it and see what happens. But we didn't, we stayed. And in doing so, we liberated the whole of Europe peacefully. Now, I understand that it's hard to do that, and I understand it demands a lot. But the integrated review set out a really impressive strategy. And it wasn't just summarised with the 3 words, God bless America.
Yeah, very good. I thank my honourable friend, and I'm sure the whole House will want to thank him for his service in Afghanistan and everything, the good that he did with his fellow serving men and women in Afghanistan. But as I think he conceded in his question, what the UK has been able to do in Afghanistan has not been possible through our efforts alone, Mr. Speaker. And we have to work with others. And of course the United States plays a massive role in these considerations. But I wish to reassure him and to reassure the House that we are not walking away. And I made that point absolutely clear to President Ghani on the 17th of June. We are, as I say to the Right Honourable Lady, I should have answered that point. We are keeping our embassy in Kabul, and we will continue to work with our friends and allies, and particularly with the government of Pakistan, to try to bring a settlement, to try to ensure that the Taliban understand that there can be no military path to victory, and there must be a negotiated solution. And that is what the British government will continue to do. And that has been very largely what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker, since 2014.
We now come to SNP Leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, it's a pleasure to follow the member for Tunbridge and Walling, and we should listen very carefully to what he had to say, for he and others in this House that served in Afghanistan, and indeed all through these islands that went to that country, those that have sadly lost their lives, but those, of course, who were injured in the conflict, many of those that are maimed for the rest of their life. Let me thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House and for advanced sight of his statement. This is an important statement, and of course it's largely about national security. And let me state that I think there is an obligation on all of us on this side of the House to work constructively, to be a critical support to what we're seeking to achieve here. And in that spirit, I commend the Prime Minister and his office for agreeing to Privy Council meetings for the Leader of the Opposition and ourselves, because it's important that we are as informed as we should be in order that we can play the role in scrutinising the government but supporting as where appropriate. Mr. Speaker, while there would have been no question about the UK realistically maintaining a presence unilaterally in Afghanistan, there is no point pretending that the vacuum created by the accelerated withdrawal of US and allied forces has done nothing but create instability. Mr. Speaker, we know the departure of the remaining Western forces from Afghanistan has emboldened Taliban insurgents. In recent days, the Taliban have seized several districts, and they have made it clear that they expect any Western forces left behind, even those guarding Kabul airport or embassies, to be a violation of the Doha deal. Mr. Speaker, it is the stability of the country and the humanitarian interests of Afghanis which should be foremost in the minds of the leaders who have had operations in that country. A situation where violent extremism and fundamentalism returns to the heart of political life in Afghanistan would be dire for Afghanis as well as our allies in the region and beyond. Mr. Speaker, in the last hours we've seen a fight back, both from Afghani government troops as well as civilians, intensify. And a stark reminder of what is at stake. Thousands of women have protested in the streets for the freedoms that they know that the Taliban will deny them. All they want is what we want, a more open Afghanistan that is a better place for women for its future instead of going back to the senseless cruelty of the past. For these reasons, it is utterly inexplicable that we have cut aid spending in this country. It hinders any progress in rooting out extremism, abuses against women, and of course protecting human rights. Can I ask the Prime Minister as to what general assessment has been made as to any potential security implications of the developments in Afghanistan? What are the implications of any threats from Al-Qaeda and Islamic State? What measures will be taken by the UK government to protect the UK's diplomatic presence in Kabul? Finally, Mr Speaker, I would like to take the opportunity to pay respects on behalf of my party to the families of the 457 British troops whose lives were lost in Afghanistan. I'm sure many of them will be following the proceedings in this House and the actions taken by the Government. They'll be asking questions to make sure that there is a lasting legacy to the sacrifices that were made by so many.
Again, I thank the right honourable gentleman for the spirit and the content of his remarks, and on the substance of his questions. To me, our assessment is that the threat from Afghanistan to this country has very substantially diminished as the result of the actions by the UK and our friends over the last 20 years, though clearly a threat remains, and the extent of that threat will now depend on exactly what happens. And to come to his points about the Taliban, their intentions and the progress that they are making, I think it is true that the Taliban are making rapid progress in rural areas. But that does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that they are guaranteed a victory in the whole of Afghanistan or across the urban areas of Afghanistan, whereas he points out in his question there is lively resistance to what they have to offer and their view of the way things should be. And that's why this government, through all our agencies, diplomatic, political, development and otherwise, we will continue to work for a negotiated settlement, particularly with regional actors such as Pakistan. And I do believe that is the best way forward for Afghanistan. There must be a settlement, and it will have to, I think we must be realistic about this, Mr. Speaker, it will have to include the Taliban.
We have audio only as we go to Tobias Elwood. Tobias.
Mr. Speaker, decisions don't come any bigger for a Prime Minister than to send our armed forces to war. But when an overseas operation lasts 2 decades, costs hundreds of British lives, billions of pounds to the taxpayer, and ends in retreat, it would be a dereliction of duty not to ask what went so wrong. We now abandon the country to the fate of the very insurgent organisation we went in to defeat in the first place. I say to the Prime Minister, if we don't learn the lessons of failing to appreciate Afghan history, the folly of imposing Western solutions, the delays in training Afghan security forces, and denying the Taliban a place at the table back in December 2001, we are likely to repeat similar mistakes in the future. I ask the Prime Minister, please conduct a formal inquiry.
Prime Minister.
I must caution my honourable friend that I don't think that is the right way forward at this stage. And he asks about he calls this a retreat, Mr. Speaker. This was never intended at any stage to be an open-ended commitment or engagement by UK armed services in Afghanistan. There was no intention for us to remain there forever. And as the House knows, Operation Herrick concluded in 2014, and at that stage, the Army conducted a thorough internal review of the lessons that needed to be learned, and those were incorporated into the integrated review of our armed and defence, security and defence strategy, which was published earlier this year. And, Mr. Speaker, given the length of such inquiries, I think the Chilcot inquiry went on for 7 years and cost many millions of pounds. I do not think that this is necessary at this stage. I think that the government should rather focus its efforts on ensuring that we do everything we can to secure the prosperity and the peace, I should say, and stability of the people of Afghanistan. And that's what we'll do.
Let's go to Ed Davey. Ed.
Mr. Speaker, can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the role our armed forces have played in Afghanistan, and especially remember the 450 men and women who laid down their lives and the many more who sustained lifelong injuries. We are grateful to them and remember them and their families. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister rightly says our country retains a responsibility to the people of Afghanistan. So with Afghan soldiers trained by allied forces surrendering all too frequently, and with some analysts predicting that the Taliban are probably only months away from taking Kabul, and with the new era of injustice, inequality and brutality facing the women and girls of Afghanistan, and with the potential for a new vector of international terrorism forming across Afghanistan, can the Prime Minister explain with far more substance how the British government plans to work with our international partners to fulfil the responsibility he accepts we still have to the Afghan people?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue, first of all, on his first point about supporting the Afghan national security and defence forces. We will continue to do that, as I have said, and as I pledged to President Ghani, with at least another £58 million. And what we are doing is working with the regional actors, particularly Pakistan, and he knows that the Pakistan security services have a very considerable influence in Afghanistan. We are working with the Pakistani government to ensure, and with the Taliban, to ensure that there is a progress towards a negotiated solution. And in Kabul, there are many actors, as I'm sure the Right Honourable gentleman knows. It is a very fractured scene politically in Kabul. The UK government knows all those actors well. It is essential that they work together for a negotiated settlement and work together for the long-term future of Afghanistan, and that's what we will do.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House to make this statement. Can I say to him that we clearly, I agree with him, owe a debt of honour to our members of our armed forces, many who have lost their lives, but also those who have been badly maimed and who have done their country proud in what they've delivered. As he said, education for women, clinics, healthcare, and freedoms that were not there before under the Taliban. The Prime Minister said in his statement, though, that he says, I hope no one will leap to the false conclusion that withdrawal of our forces somehow means the end of Britain's commitment to Afghanistan. So I have a very simple question for him. How far does that commitment extend? If the Taliban take over and they take away the women's rights to education, do we intervene? If they take away the rights and freedoms that we gave them, do we intervene? If they end up killing and maiming more people in Afghanistan and allowing terrorist organizations in, do we intervene? My question is, as one veteran said to me literally 48 hours ago, this begins to look a little bit like the last days of Vietnam, an unprecedented and hurried exit with no commitment. Are we committed?
Yes, as I said in my answers to the Right Honourable Lady and to other members who've asked effectively the same point, the circumstances in 2001 when this country went into Afghanistan were quite exceptional. NATO's Article 5 of mutual appeal for defence was invoked by our American friends, and that's why we went in. And it was a quite exceptional moment. And since then, in the last 20 years, we have achieved a very great deal. Increase in life expectancy in Afghanistan from 56 to 64 years. The education of women has been mentioned, and we will continue through development assistance and by other means to do whatever we can for the long-term future of Afghanistan. But as he knows, the fundamental military decision to cease Operation Herrick was the turning point. What we're going to do now is use our best endeavours, our best efforts, all our political engagement to produce a negotiated settlement and to produce a stable future for Afghanistan.
We can now go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has to be a day of reflection. We have spent billions of pounds in the war in Afghanistan. 450 British troops have lost their lives. Thousands of Americans and other troops have lost their lives. And many, many thousands of Afghan people have lost their lives. And many more have been forced to be refugees in exile all around the region, as well as in Western Europe. Surely we need to think about this very, very carefully. And it's disappointing that the Prime Minister appeared to reject calls for an inquiry at the Liaison Committee yesterday and appeared to reject the request for an inquiry made by the member for Bournemouth East today. Can I ask him to think again about that? Surely we need an inquiry into how such a decision came around to go into Afghanistan in the first place, and now the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and of course the chaos that is being left behind. He will have noted that there are some talks going on which have been cautiously welcomed by the United States in Tehran between the Afghan government and the Taliban. He will also have noted that there are large numbers of Afghan refugees now in Tajikistan as well as in Pakistan. What efforts will he be making to try to ensure that there is not a descent into civil war in Afghanistan, but some kind of diplomatic initiative that will at least bring about security for the people of Afghanistan, and that includes obviously the entire population, and I'm thinking here particularly those children that have suffered so much and those women that have been so grievously discriminated against within that country. And whilst Britain is withdrawing, surely we need to recognise that when we make hasty foreign policy decisions to go to war, the consequences go on for a very long time. In this case, it is now the 20th anniversary of that decision.
Minister.
Thank the right honourable gentleman, and I of course am aware of what's happening in Tehran and the contacts that are taking place. And the role of the UK government is to promote dialogue, and I've said what I've said about the Taliban and the reality of the position that Afghanistan finds itself in. I don't think that the Taliban are capable of victory by military means. I've made that point several times, and the UK will work principally through our friends in Pakistan, but other actors as well on the ground in Kabul to try to bring about a settlement that works for Afghanistan. On his question about an inquiry, I really want to repeat what I said to several colleagues who've asked that. I don't think that another Chilcot-style inquiry is called for at this stage, particularly since the fundamental decision was taken in 2014 to end Op Herrick. It's a long time ago now. But what I do think the House could always consider is whether the Defence Committee, for instance, wishes to investigate themselves.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend for this statement, and having been in Afghanistan many times, can I add also my very sincere tribute to our armed forces and also the civilian support and the NGOs and all those who risked and sometimes sacrificed life and limb to give the people of Afghanistan a better future. Can I ask my right honourable friend what discussions he has had with our international partners, particularly the United States, about how we will monitor and react if the hard-won gains that we made, including the rights of women, roll backwards under the brutal medieval influence of the Taliban, and perhaps even, God forbid, the re-emergence of a terrorist threat.
I thank the right honourable gentleman who knows a great deal about Afghanistan and the problems that country faces, and of course we've raised repeatedly with our American friends and other colleagues in NATO the legacy that we wish to preserve in Afghanistan, particularly the gains that have been made for women, and they understand that. I think in all candour, I must be honest with that, I don't think that the military options open to us are very great, and I think people need to recognise that, to return to the point I was making to my right honourable friend for Chingford. But we will do whatever we can diplomatically, politically, to get a realistic, lasting solution for Afghanistan.
Henry Benn.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told the Liaison Committee that he was apprehensive about the future of Afghanistan and that it was fraught with risks. A sentiment shared by many Afghans who fear that the gains of which he has spoken so eloquently today, girls' education, democracy, may be lost. After 2 decades and the sacrifice of so many British lives, whose loss we mourn today and always, why is the Prime Minister so confident that the Taliban will never again allow any part of Afghanistan, because they control some parts already, to be used by terrorist forces, including ISIS, as a base from which to attack this country and other of our allies?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point. I think that obviously the Taliban have for several years now controlled a very considerable part of Afghanistan, as he knows, and it's during that period that we haven't seen terrorist operations launched against the wider world. And I think what may weigh on the Taliban's minds as they think about how to behave, whether to allow the Khorasan province group or Haqqani network or Al-Qaeda to return and reform in the way that they were there in the past and to act outside Afghanistan, they should remember what happened last time.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
So it sounds from that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as if the Prime Minister is saying that if they go down that route again, there could be another military intervention. So does he accept that a fanatical brand of Islamist terrorism, sheltered and supported by the Taliban extremists, has not only attacked the West before, but is highly likely to do so again? He mentioned that the military operations route is not great, but rather than veering from occupation to evacuation and back again in a few years' time, will he now commission a study of an alternative containment strategy involving selective strikes with allies from strategic bases to prevent a total terrorist takeover of Afghanistan?
Well, Afghanistan, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman, but Afghanistan was never occupied, Madam Deputy Speaker, and nor is this an evacuation. But what we will certainly look at, in addition to working with friends and partners in the region, is to what extent counter-terrorist, I think the point he's getting at, to what extent counter-terrorist activity can be conducted from outside Afghanistan on outside-in basis.
11 withdrawn. So Andrew Mitchell.
I thank the Prime Minister very much for coming and making this difficult and important statement today to the House. I thank him also for what he said about the contribution that's been made by the Girls' Education Challenge Fund, which we set up in 2010 and has been responsible for the education in Afghanistan of millions of girls. It seems to me that his statement makes eloquently clear the limits of soft power and the importance of soft power. I take it that that was one of the things he was referring to at the end of his statement when he spoke about the different tools for the future, because it is soft power now which will help the Afghan state survive and hopefully deliver for its people. So I hope you won't think it's unreasonable to ask if he will look again at the recent extraordinary decision to cut our development spending in Afghanistan by £200 million.
I thank him, and I know this is a subject that he has returned to many times in this House, and I understand how deeply he feels about it and how much he understands. It's still the case Madam Deputy Speaker, that we were the third biggest bilateral donor last year to Afghanistan. We're committing a further £100 million per year to the people of Afghanistan, plus the military and logistical support for the Afghan National Security and Defence Forces. I think most people in this country understand that after giving £3.2 billion in development assistance over the last 10 years to Afghanistan, I think people do understand that we're in tough financial times here in the UK, and that it remains a remarkable thing and a matter of pride that the UK is able to continue to support the people of Afghanistan.